This city has been rainy for a whole week. Yenzai gazed out of the taxi window at the dark, mottled clouds hanging low in the sky. She thought that today's rain might be from a novice still learning the ropes, which would explain the uneven distribution. Some areas heavy, others light. The dense drizzle tapped rhythmically against the car window as she reached out to catch a few drops. A cool, tingling sensation seeped into her skin, refreshing her. Just then, a flash of blinding lightning suddenly tore through the clouds, followed by a deafening clap of thunder, startling her into retracting her hand and rolling up the window, a little scared. Before long, the car stopped outside a high-end restaurant. Guided by the waiter, she entered a private room where she could hear the lively sounds of guests enjoying themselves. Standing there, she found herself hesitant to knock. She reminded herself she had to see him one last time, to leave behind an image of grace and composure, so that in the future, if he ever thought of her, it wouldn't be with disdain. Finally, summoning her courage, she raised her hand to knock, only for the door to swing open on its own. Gu Pingxing looked at the suddenly appearing Yenzai in surprise and said, "I thought you weren't coming." "Uncle Gu, you're getting engaged. How could I not be here?" As if the previous unpleasantness had never existed, she flashed a flawless smile and walked past him into the room. The people inside welcomed her warmly, and Su Yifan, with a mischievous grin, said, "Little Leaf, you're late. That means a punishment." Punishment it is. She took the wine bottle on the table and filled her glass to the brim. The others cheered. When did this girl become so bold? Seeing her truly drink down the glass with a smile, Su Yifan began to reminisce. When I first met her, she would only hide behind that guy Gu Pingxing, calling him uncle. Gu Pingxing seemed to forget what he was about to do, already turning around to sit down and laughing along with the crowd. Yenzai felt a sting in her heart at his smile and quickly filled her glass again, offering it to Chengyu. Chengyu was the guest of honor today, Gu Pingxing's fiancé. As soon as Yenzai entered, she noticed Chengyu, who looked stunning, like the moon among a sky full of stars, her brilliance unyielding even against the most dazzling lights. Together with Gu Pingxing, they appeared perfectly matched. "Miss Cheng, once you're with my uncle, I'll have to call you Auntie. I hope you don't mind." Chengyu stood up and smiled. "How could I mind? With a lovely junior like you, I'm just delighted. I raise a glass to you, wishing you and Uncle Gu eternal unity and happiness." She didn't quite believe her own words, but they sounded good when spoken. Gu Pingxing stopped her from drinking any more and looked a bit displeased. "All right, kids shouldn't drink alcohol. I'm not a child anymore. Besides, this is my blessing for your future. Are you sure you don't want me to drink?" He could hear the provocation in her tone, so different from her usual obedient self, and didn't stop her this time. Instead, he frowned at her as she casually downed the drink before returning to converse with Su Yifan. Throughout the meal, Yenzai forced herself not to look at him, not to think about him, and not to envy his fiancé. Su Yifan noticed her unease and advised her not to push herself too hard. She smiled faintly, signaling that she was all right, and then added, "I'm going abroad." Su Yifan didn't seem surprised, almost understanding, but he was still a bit worried. "Little Leaf, is this what you really want?" "It doesn't matter. What's important is that my mom thinks I won't disturb him if I leave." Looking at her bitter smile, Su Yifan sighed. "When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning." Yenzai sat on the plane, deleting everything related to Gu Pingxing from her phone before switching it off. Looking back at these traces of the past, she felt it was impossible to let go completely, but she feared even more that she might be unable to resist reaching out to him again. When a relationship reaches its end, there's no turning back. All she could do was not to disturb his life. Gu Pingxing was a friend of her adoptive father. During her senior year internship, since her workplace was in the same office building as Gu Pingxing's company, her adoptive father entrusted her care to him. Their first meeting was a dinner he hosted. He wore a sharp suit and an expensive watch, exuding a charming elegance that made her instinctively behave politely and cautiously. Gu Pingxing asked her if she was adapting to the internship and if she had encountered any difficulties. She smiled and replied, "Everything is great. Although it's a bit busy, it's fulfilling and challenging, and I'm learning things you can't teach in school." Her words sounded grand, but her thoughts were quite the opposite. Every day was filled with printing documents and running errands, delivering items from one department to another, while also listening to complaints and receiving scolding. Sometimes, she was sent out on errands with a pile of things to deliver to the older staff in the office. This job was hardly worth the trouble. Sometimes, when others asked questions, it didn't warrant a serious answer, as they might just be making small talk and didn't really want to hear your complaints. This was a lesson Yan Zai learned after over 20 years of navigating the world. Gu Pingxing stopped asking about work and simply nodded. "That's good to hear. But if you run into any tough problems, you can come to me. I might be able to help." She continued to be obedient, but deep down, she didn't take it to heart. After their first meeting, they occasionally crossed paths during commutes or lunch breaks. Gu Pingxing was always surrounded by glamorous people, engaged in lively conversations. Yan Zai adhered to her principle of stay away, don't disturb, don't trouble, and try to avoid him. If unavoidable, she would hastily greet him and then leave with grace. During the first half of her senior year, she still had school matters to attend to. One afternoon, a student leader called, asking her to hurry and revise some documents. Yan Zai had to rush from the company straight to the school. Unfortunately, it was rush hour, and she had been unable to hail a taxi several times, which made her grit her teeth in frustration. Just as she hesitated over whether to walk to the subway station, a BMW M760 Li X Drive pulled up in front of her. She remembered this clearly because one of her colleagues was a rich second generation who had been excitedly looking for a new car and had been studying a stack of magazines about it. When she had some free time, she flipped through the magazines and immediately had her eye on this model. The window rolled down, revealing Gu Pingxing's handsome face. He asked if she was in a hurry and offered her a ride. Yan Zai almost blurted out, "No, thank you," but she swallowed the words back down. Feeling grateful, she settled into the back seat, taking in the bustling scene of people coming and going under the streetlights. There was some traffic, and she felt a bit embarrassed as she asked him if he had any important plans for the evening, not wanting to take up too much of his time. Gu Pingxing smiled and replied that he had no plans. After a moment, he continued, "You don't need to keep thanking me or worry about being a bother. If I said I'd help, it means I have the time." She was left speechless by his kindness, only able to nod and say, "Okay." On her bus ride home that night, the wind brushed against her face, and looking up, she saw the stars twinkling in the sky. Suddenly, she recalled Gu Pingxing's words and his confident demeanor. He seemed more sincere than she had previously imagined. Her instinct to keep him at arm's length stemmed from placing him outside her circle, but now it felt like she could make some changes. By the time she got home, it was late. Assuming her adoptive mother, who loved her beauty sleep, was already asleep, she didn't turn on the lights. However, when she entered the living room, she noticed a shadow by the window as someone appeared to be smoking. She quickly turned on the light and asked with concern, "Mom, what's wrong?" Her adoptive mother extinguished the half-burned cigarette in an ashtray piled high with ash and gestured for her to sit down. She looked like she had been pondering for a long time, waiting to speak. "Xiao Yi, I'm going to divorce your dad. I know this might be sudden for you, but I hope you can understand." Yan Zai thought to herself that it wasn't sudden at all. Her adoptive father hadn't been home for 2 months, as he insisted on spending more money on art that few people valued, neglecting the sacrifices her mother made for survival, while setting aside her own dreams. The mundanity of life had long since eroded the once pure love, leaving only aging faces and growing complaints. Her adoptive mother, unable to bear children, found that an adopted child couldn't sustain a tedious marriage. She remained calm, even appearing overly mature. "Mom, if you truly feel unhappy now and no longer love Dad, then I support you." The divorce proceeded more smoothly and quickly than she had expected. What surprised Yan Zai was that after their discussions, they decided to leave the house to her. Yan Zai hadn't seen Gu Pingsheng for several days. She didn't spot him during her commutes or at the restaurants and coffee shops he usually frequented during lunch breaks. Feeling a bit down, she quickly snapped herself out of it, scolding her own thoughts. What are you doing? He has his own things to deal with. Why does it concern you? Determined to stop thinking about it, she returned to the office, only to receive a call from Gu Pingsheng just as she sat down. His voice on the other end sounded somewhat hurried. Yan Zai, your dad asked me to deliver some things to you. I can bring them over after work. She felt it would be too much trouble for him, so she immediately declined. No, it's fine. I can come to your office to pick them up. Are you there now? After speaking, she realized that might not be the best approach. Or, when are you free? He paused for a moment, as if figuring out when he could spare some time for her. I just got back from a business trip, so I'm not at the office. If you don't mind the trouble, you can come to my house to pick it up after work. This time, Yan Zai hesitated. She considered whether it was feasible to go to his house just to get something, but before she could decide, he urged, Have you made a decision? Taking a deep breath, she made up her mind. All right, send me the address. I'll come find you after work. Before heading out to meet Gu Pingsheng, she cautiously called her adoptive father to confirm. He was busy with the art project that captivated him and had asked Gu Pingsheng to drop off the items when he happened to visit. Following the address, she arrived at his home, which was in an upscale community. She quickly concluded it was safe there when the security guard stopped her at the gate, informing her that she couldn't enter unless a resident came to escort her. Reluctantly, she called Gu Pingsheng, only to find that her call went unanswered. Looking at the security guard's skeptical expression, like he was thinking, see, I knew it was a scam, she had a fleeting moment of doubt about whether he was intentionally messing with her. She sat outside on a bench for about 2 hours. Just as her phone battery dwindled to 5%, he finally called her back, telling her not to leave as he was on his way back. It was almost winter. The trees had shed their leaves, leaving only a few behind, and even the meticulously trimmed evergreens seemed to shiver in the cold. She shivered in the chilly wind, wishing she could sneak into the security room for warmth, but that was obviously not an option since the guard still maintained his "I knew you were a fraud" attitude. When Gu Pingsheng's headlights shone towards her, she dismissed all the curses she had mentally hurled at him over the past couple of hours, dashing to his car with the speed of a sprinter, and strutted past the guard with her head held high. In that moment, the sense of satisfaction made up for the damage to her pride from enduring the guard's disdain for so long. Gu Pingsheng seemed like a superhero coming to rescue her. Once she was safely inside the car, she realized that if he hadn't stood her up, she wouldn't have had to endure this ordeal. I thought someone like you would keep his word. I apologize for this. I assumed you'd be getting here later, thinking you would take the subway during rush hour, he replied, maintaining a calm demeanor as if he hadn't done anything wrong and that she was merely being too impatient. This infuriated Yan Zai, and she mentally threw several punches at him while arguing back. I admit I did arrive early to avoid the crowded subway, but you didn't clarify exactly what time I should come. By the time I got here, it was almost 7 p.m., which is naturally evening. Besides, I tried to call you, but you didn't answer. Don't busy professionals like you always keep their phones on. After her passionate speech, she took a couple of deep breaths, feeling she'd made solid points, though perhaps a bit too heated. Stealing a glance, she saw him looking at her with a smile, as if he were regarding a disobedient child. My time outside of work is my own. No one has the right to dictate whether I keep my phone on or set it to silent. Yan Zai was left speechless. She could only stare at the man before her, sadly realizing she wasn't his match in this verbal sparring. At the same time, she felt relieved that he didn't treat her like a younger relative chastising her for being unreasonable. The prolonged eye contact broke when Gu Pingsheng noticed her cheeks had flushed, and he cleared his throat, redirecting his gaze. You haven't eaten yet, right? I brought some takeout back for you. Realizing the atmosphere had turned awkward, Yan Zai's eyes darted around, searching for something to focus on, which made her forget to decline his offer. She quickly finished the meal and started clearing the table. To be honest, she was quite different from the girls Gu Pingsheng had interacted with before. She was carefully measured in her responses. She understood that excessive compliance was likely a facade, but her cautiousness and deliberate efforts to handle things carefully were genuine. He pulled out the items her adoptive father wanted to give her, a pair of crackle-glazed teacups in a rich purple hue. They were perfectly sized, both beautiful and practical. Yan Zai's smile nearly spilled over, her thoughts consumed by the cups, completely missing the moment of surprise in Gu Pingsheng's eyes. These were the teacups she had admired months ago during a visit to her adoptive father's studio. She had liked them very much but kept it to herself, never mentioning it. She hadn't expected him to notice. That night, as Gu Pingsheng drove her home, he rolled down the window just as he was about to leave, waving at Yan Zai, who stood at the door watching him go. When she approached, he said, "I hope you won't hide from me anymore in the future." It turned out her little tricks had never escaped his notice. From that point on, Yan Zai truly stopped avoiding Gu Pingsheng. They even began having lunch together occasionally, leading others to mistakenly assume she was his new intern. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, every time she heard someone say that, she'd feel an irritable urge to murmur, "I'm not." Her adoptive mother had decided to take a job overseas and hoped Yan Zai would go with her, wanting her to study abroad and experience a broader world. However, after much contemplation, Yan Zai declined. She couldn't articulate why, but a vague feeling told her she didn't want to leave. In December, shortly after her mother's departure, her adoptive father gave her a bank card with 100,000 yuan, asking her to vacate the house. Since the ownership transfer hadn't been completed, she realized she had no right to stay, even if she wanted to. At that moment, she understood why this man had readily agreed to give her the house, and why he had specifically gifted her those teacups. It was all to placate her and her mother, while he achieved his own ends. Her adoptive father told her she could take her time finding a new place, yet during the day, while she was away, he brought people to view the house. When Yan Zai learned of this, she moved out that night and checked into a budget hotel. Living under this temporary roof, she felt precarious and vulnerable. She had thought she was sensible enough to handle life's unpredictability, but faced with such blatant manipulation, she felt deeply hurt. She didn't dare tell her adoptive mother about this. She feared it would upset her and disrupt her life. Her friends were few, and late-night venting would only spoil their mood. So she tossed and turned, her gaze lingering on her contacts list, yet hesitated to reach out, tormenting herself throughout the night. The next day, she went to work, feeling groggy and nearly dozing off at her computer multiple times. It wasn't until Gu Pingsheng texted her about going out for cod roe that she mustered enough energy to finish her morning tasks. Gu Pingsheng was surprised at her listlessness. "Yan Zai, did you not sleep last night?" Nodding while stuffing her mouth with food, her voice came out colder than she intended. "I moved out and am temporarily staying at a budget hotel. I can't sleep." He dropped his chopsticks with a thud. "Is this how you handle things? You should have found a place before moving." His tone felt like a reprimand directed at a willful child, bringing her grievances to the surface. "Do you think I wanted this? He brought people to view the house while I was gone. What if someone got a hold of my keys?" He paused, then cautiously asked, "You mean your father?" Hearing father made her scoff. Looking up, she emphasized, "He's just my adoptive father." Gu Pingsheng shook his head, surprised that she was being pressured by her own adoptive father. He felt he had chosen the wrong friend and asked again, "So you're living in a hotel while looking for a new place?" "That's all I can do. If you don't mind, you can stay at my place until you find a new place." As soon as he said it, he regretted it. It seemed inappropriate for a man much older than her to make such a suggestion, which contradicted the composure he prided himself on. Fortunately, she declined. "No, I don't want to trouble you. Forget I mentioned it." Yan Zai seemed to always prioritize whether she'd inconvenience others when considering matters, something Gu Pingsheng hoped she could change. He added, "Just make sure to lock your door and check the room thoroughly. Budget hotels aren't always safe." She nodded in silence, but mentally noted his advice. On her way back to the hotel that night, her mind was filled with news reports about murder cases, conjuring images of ruthless killers and the gruesome fates of victims, leaving her tense and covered in goosebumps. Predictably, she spent another sleepless night. As dawn approached and exhaustion finally overtook her, she fell asleep, only to wake up at 8:30 a.m. Trying to get up and rush to work, she found herself utterly drained. To her dismay, she had caught a cold. She called in sick, lamenting the loss of her attendance bonus for the month. After getting dressed in her warmest down jacket, she went downstairs to buy medicine and grab some congee from a breakfast shop. After taking her medicine and eating, she collapsed into bed. When she finally woke up in the afternoon, she saw that Gu Pingxing had called her several times. Groggily, she replied with a message, explaining she hadn't gone to work due to her cold. As soon as she sent it, he called back, launching into a lecture. "You should have at least let me know you were sick. Do you know how worried someone could be when you suddenly go silent?" Her body was on fire. She suspected she had a fever and had no strength to argue back. Instead, she hoarsely apologized. "I'm sorry." People tend to feel more vulnerable when sick, and for the first time, she felt weak in front of him. "Gu Pingxing, I think I have a fever." Not long after hanging up, he arrived, forcefully packed all her things, checked her out, and took her to the hospital. To his astonishment, he discovered that Yan Zai was squeamish about needles and blood. As soon as the nurse drew blood, she covered her eyes and trembled uncontrollably, leaving him both amused and bewildered. After a bit of hassle, Yan Zai officially moved into Gu Pingxing's home. She promised to find a place and move out as soon as possible, and also assured him she would retreat to her room early to avoid intruding on his private life. When Gu Pingxing heard her say that, he was puzzled for a while before realizing what she meant. He shot her a glare. "I never bring women home for the night." As she watched him turn and walk into the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of happiness at his words, thinking how rare it was to find a man with a tidy private life. But then, the implication of his words sank in. If taken literally, he clearly excluded her from being one of those women. "Gu Pingxing, clarify what you mean." Living with him, Yan Zai discovered that his life was both disciplined and refined. He woke up at 6 every morning and arrived at work before 7:30. When not working, he went to bed before 11, maintaining regular and nutritious meals. He enjoyed cycling and playing golf, and occasionally went for a run or read books in his free time. However, if urgent work came up, he could also pull all-nighters. To keep pace with his work routine, Yan Zai had to adjust her habits, forcing herself to rise early and sleep on time, slowly shedding many of her bad habits from school. At first, she complained, but gradually she began to appreciate the benefits of a regular schedule. Plus, Gu Pingxing sometimes offered her valuable advice on her internship, leading her to willingly adapt to his way of life. Today, Gu Pingxing had arranged to play golf with friends. Knowing she had looked at several houses but couldn't decide, he invited her along. She said she didn't play and would just watch, but he tugged at her ponytail. "It's better than being stuck here, fretting over nothing." So, she found herself meeting the talkative and friendly Su Yifan. He looked even younger than Gu Pingxing, with a smile like a kind neighbor's. Yan Zai suspected he relied on that impression to charm other girls, but since he was nice to her as Gu Pingxing's sidekick, she appreciated it. Su Yifan was Gu Pingxing's college classmate, and taking advantage of the moment, she asked a lot about Gu Pingxing's student days, something she would usually never do regarding others' private lives. Su Yifan, sharp as he was, quickly picked up on her unusual interest. "Xiao Yezi, you're not falling for your Uncle Gu, are you?" Caught off guard, she instinctively denied it. "Of course not. I'm just curious." But Su Yifan gave her a knowing look, as if saying, "You can't fool me," which made her blush. "I've seen plenty of girls like you. Your thoughts are written all over your face. Denying it won't help. Like a stone stirring up 1,000 waves, some things are better left unspoken." Once voiced, those ignored feelings came rushing forth, unstoppable. As Yan Zai found herself in a tumult of thoughts, her face heating up, Gu Pingxing approached her. "What's wrong?" She snapped back to reality, meeting his gentle gaze. Her heart racing in fear, he'd noticed something. Nothing. Su Yifan jumped in to lighten the mood. "We're just building a revolutionary friendship, so don't ask." Since returning home, Yan Zai couldn't bear to look Gu Pingxing in the eye, so she had no idea he was mulling over her guilty expression for a long time, mistakenly believing Su Yifan's flirtatious nature was directed at her. He even called Su Yifan to verify, only to be met with a laugh. "I'd love to, but Xiao Yezi's taste is a bit off. She doesn't like me." After dinner, he suggested they go for a walk. Yan Zai initially wanted to refuse, but when he mentioned helping her with her housing situation, she had no choice but to agree. As they walked, they discussed and analyzed options, finally settling on an apartment building not far from his place. Typically, given her cautious nature, it would take her at least a week from signing the contract to moving in. This time, however, she became an action-oriented person, moving in just 3 days later. To thank him for all the help, she treated him to dinner. Yan Zai thought they could return to their normal relationship afterward, but unexpectedly, a colleague caught them together. Given that they had been commuting to work together most of the time, the gossip spread like wildfire through the office. Before long, even the cleaning staff knew about it. The new intern, Yan Zai, had snagged the heart of the office's dreamboat, Gu Pingxing, known for his prowess with women. Yan Zai believed she hadn't done anything wrong. They were both single, and even if something were happening between them, it shouldn't be so shameful, especially since they hadn't crossed any boundaries. But rumors were relentless, like a fierce tiger. The more she tried to explain, the more tangled things became. Angry yet powerless, she found herself inventing excuses to avoid him. In an unexpected turn of events, Su Yifan invited her out for a meal. Still troubled by the rumors, she lacked any enthusiasm and found the food tasteless. Seeing her disinterest, Su Yifan couldn't hold back. "You're an adult now. Why do you care so much about what others say?" She looked up from her bowl, ready to explain, but as soon as she said because, she lost her resolve and looked away. Deep down, she knew she shouldn't let such trivial matters bother her. However, the thought of her feelings being belittled by others made it hard to let go. Her gaze aimlessly swept the room until it landed on a familiar face. He was looking at her, walking towards her. Yan Zai turned in surprise and asked Su Yifan, "You didn't say he would come." Su Yifan waved at Gu Pingxing, smiling. "The more you try to hide from him, the more it looks like you're hiding something." As she watched Gu Pingxing take a seat with his usual ease, she gathered her courage and apologized. "I'm sorry for causing you trouble because of me." "That's nothing," he replied casually. For someone like Gu Pingxing, who navigated this world with ease, such matters were trivial. But for Yan Zai, it felt different. She was still young and hadn't weathered the harsh trials of life. Remember, it's better to focus on your work than to pay attention to idle gossip. That way, you won't feel bad when others seem to have more than you do. He flipped the reasoning around, leaving Yan Zai quite surprised. After spending so much time together, it seemed he always had a way of instilling various thoughts in her. What puzzled her even more was that she had never felt any resentment towards him. Days passed in a busy yet uneventful manner. When convenient, Gu Pingxing would drive her home from work. If he had time, he'd arrange gatherings with Su Yifan, and whenever appropriate, he would patiently guide her through work-related challenges. Yan Zai thought her feelings for him would fade, just like the gradually quieting rumors, but contrary to her expectations, she became even more reliant on him. As the new year approached, her foster mother returned from abroad, and Yan Zai brought her back to the apartment she rented. She had to confess that her foster father had sold their old home. After a lengthy discussion, she finally calmed her mother's anger, only to find out the next day that her mother had confronted her ex-husband and retrieved a bank card with 200,000 yuan. "That's what he owes me," her mother declared. When the first bell of the new year rang, fireworks lit up the city sky. Yenzai took the initiative to call Gu Pingxing and wished him a happy new year. Actually, she said something else too, but the noise on his end drowned it out. She had whispered, "Gu Pingxing, meeting you is my luck." Encountering someone she liked at the best age, devoid of any melodramatic twists typical of TV dramas, their relationship was simple and beautiful, and that was enough for her. This was her little slice of happiness at that moment. Throughout the holiday, they didn't meet in person, only chatting through their phones about everyday matters, which still filled her with joy. Her foster mother had her suspicions, but was easily convinced by Yenzai's unassailable excuses until the day before her departure abroad. While helping pack, her mother brought up the idea of Yenzai studying abroad again. She firmly refused, and the atmosphere shifted suddenly. Her mother dropped what she was holding and fixed her with a serious gaze, making Yenzai feel guilty. It turned out her mother already knew about her feelings for Gu Pingxing. The reason she hadn't pressed the issue was that she hoped Yenzai would confess on her own, but she had clearly underestimated her daughter's ability to hide her feelings. "I just simply like him." This blunt statement was something Yenzai would never have said before, but today it came out smoothly, without hesitation. "Does he like you?" That question left her speechless for a moment. "I don't know, but I have the chance to find out." Who said girls couldn't take the initiative? Yenzai liked Gu Pingxing, and after waiting so long, she finally found someone who truly moved her. She couldn't give up without exploring her feelings further. Her mother frowned, grasping her hand tightly, not understanding her daughter's seemingly reckless behavior. "I won't allow it, regardless of whether he likes you or not. Just the age difference makes you two incompatible. He's a whole decade older than you." This made Yenzai chuckle slightly. "Mom, what century are we in?" Her mother had been hurt in a failed marriage, the wounds still fresh, which made her overly cautious. No matter how Yenzai explained, her mother remained convinced that if she pursued Gu Pingxing, she would be the one left hurt due to their differences. "I hope you can find someone closer to your age. You'll have common ground and shared experiences." Her mother's stubbornness left Yenzai with no choice but to pretend to agree, but this only strengthened her resolve to ask Gu Pingxing about his feelings. A few days later, when Yenzai finally mustered the courage to express her feelings to Gu Pingxing, he casually introduced his girlfriend to her. "Chengyu, my girlfriend," he said, radiating warmth and confidence. Her face turned pale instantly. All the rehearsed lines she had prepared for this moment turned to dust. Sitting there, she could only nod along to their conversation, unsure of what else to say or where to place her hands. In the end, she fled, a coward in her own story. Her love hadn't even begun before it had already ended. Sticking to her timid nature, she became a turtle retreating into its shell, arriving at work earlier than usual, leaving later, ordering takeout for lunch, and only stepping out of the office when necessary, avoiding any chance encounters with him. Yet sometimes, she couldn't help but steal a glance at him, and in those moments of weakness, she reminded herself to hold on. Her colleagues soon learned of her heartbreak. Gu Pingxing had a new girlfriend, a woman named Chengyu, who was undeniably more attractive and accomplished than she was. She felt like the ugly duckling, cast aside without a second thought. Many well-meaning colleagues made concerned comments, but the sympathy was scarce, and the gossip was plentiful. After counting the days, Yenzai decided to hand in her resignation. Fortunately, Su Yifan, her friend forged in the fires of camaraderie, stood by her side. He didn't ask questions, he simply accompanied her, drinking bottle after bottle with her. With each empty bottle, she whispered to herself, "Forget Gu Pingxing." She lost track of how many bottles she consumed, eventually reaching a state of hazy oblivion. In this drunken stupor, she dreamt a vivid dream where she no longer felt cowardly. She grasped Gu Pingxing's impeccably tailored suit collar, crying as she confessed how much she liked him, how since that day he took her to the hospital, she had completely fallen for him. For the first time, she had truly hidden someone in her heart, only to realize that he had liked someone else before she could even speak her feelings aloud, leaving her with no right to hate him. In her dream, he gently wiped away her tears and spoke soothingly, "Yenzai, in a few years, if you still like me, we can be together. If you don't, then I wish you well." She shook her head fervently in the dream. "No, I'm afraid that by then you'll have changed your mind, and you won't be with me anymore." The next day, she woke up with a splitting headache, faint memories of the dream lingering, but the specifics had slipped away completely. Far across the ocean, her foster mother called, asking how she was doing. Yenzai hoarsely replied, He doesn't like me. He likes someone else." After a long silence on the other end, her mother spoke gently, "Sweetheart, let it go. It won't be long before you forget." After completing her graduation defense, Yenzai went abroad, where she stayed for 3 years without entering a new relationship. She would say, "Whenever I think of someone who isn't him, I just can't muster any interest." Her foster mother found a partner to walk through life with, occasionally chatting with her, but seldom mentioning Gu Pingxing. Whenever it came up, Yenzai would deflect with a phrase like, "I've moved on. I just need time to forget." Yet deep down, she often pondered, when will I forget? Tomorrow? Next year? Or will I never forget him? Love is indeed elusive. Sometimes, it seems like a complete turnaround could allow you to let go of someone you once adored completely, while at other times, even a brief encounter can leave an indelible mark for years. 3 years later, when Yenzai returned to her home country, she traveled to many cities, but deliberately avoided the one where Gu Pingxing lived. She wished him happiness with his beautiful wife and children, but she was also afraid of seeing him in such a complete and happy life. The thought of his happiness being unrelated to her made her feel jealous. In her second year back, at a client appreciation event hosted by her company, she unexpectedly ran into Su Yifan. She had left so decisively, even changing her phone number, which meant they hadn't been in contact for a long time. Su Yifan didn't even recognize her at first glance. "You've changed quite a bit over the years, but you're even more beautiful now," he said, raising his glass to toast her. She took a small sip and smiled wryly. "It's been 5 years. Naturally, I'm different now." "Has everything changed?" Looking at the knowing smirk on his face, Yenzai thought for a moment and replied, "Maybe." He frowned at her feigned nonchalance and remarked, "Not necessarily." "How is he?" Although she knew this question would sting, he was the one she couldn't let go of, like a poison entwined in her heart with no antidote in sight. "If you still can't forget him, then I'll tell you. He's doing well, but his home is missing a mistress." Yenzai was taken aback, and he merely smiled. It turned out her foster mother had worried about her fixation and, before she left for abroad, had sought out Gu Pingxing, hoping he could help her daughter move on. That was why Gu Pingxing had a beautiful, graceful girlfriend, why he hadn't reached out for months, and why there had been a carefully arranged engagement party for her. This revelation shook Yenzai awake from her years of misunderstanding. She finally grasped her mother's hesitant comments and understood why such a composed person like Gu Pingxing had suddenly taken a girlfriend without any warning. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you've grown up. You're no longer that impulsive girl worried about everything, and your mother can trust you now." Listening to him, she reflected that it didn't have to be this way. If Gu Pingxing had simply told her these things, she would have obediently listened to him and gone abroad without complaint. In the end, it was still a matter of not liking her enough to let her stay. Then why didn't he tell me? Su Yifan downed the last of his drink, his eyes clear as if he had seen everything the world had to offer. "You are so young. Who could be sure that your feelings were genuine and not just a fleeting impulse or gratitude? Some people are better met a little later in life, Xiaoya." Though she didn't fully understand his words, she realized that Gu Pingxing had liked her, and likely still did. The next evening, Yenzai found herself standing in the neighborhood where Gu Pingxing lived. The security guard hadn't changed. He was still the same person who had once blocked her from entering, waiting to see her make a fool of herself. She asked if she needed someone to pick her up to enter, and he waved his hand, saying, "No need. Mr. Gu instructed that if you return, you mustn't be stopped. Dragging her luggage through the familiar surroundings, she reached the door and, when it opened, revealed her brightest smile. Mr. Gu, I heard your home is missing a mistress. Do you think I'm suitable? Gu Pingsheng snapped out of his surprise, playfully tugging at her ponytail, as if in these 5 years, she had just stepped out for a stroll and hadn't gone far at all. Yet the tremor in his voice betrayed his excitement. If it's you, you can officially start right now. With that, he enveloped her in a tight embrace, a tender smile on his lips. Just know, the term for this position is a lifetime. Absolutely no regrets, she replied, returning his embrace, heart brimming with joy, feeling as if she had stepped into the warmth of a dream she had cherished years ago. In the end, through all the twists and turns, they hadn't missed each other after all.